Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will meet today for a summit in Alaska, their first since 2019. The session has been billed by President Trump as a feeling-out moment to explore the possibility of a peace deal on Ukraine. But ahead of the meeting, EU leaders issued a clear warning. Ukraine must not be sidelined, and any agreement must uphold its territorial integrity, include Kiev at the negotiating table, and come with robust security guarantees. Well, joining me in the studio is Dzvinka Kachur, a researcher at the Center for Sustainability Transitions, and she's also the co-founder of the Ukrainian Association of South Africa, to tell us what's at stake.
Thank you, Lindy. Thank you for having me and also for paying attention to this important topic.
So what do you expect from these peace talks? Is there any cautious optimism?
Of course, I think like all Ukrainians, we would like to see the end of war, and we would like to see the ceasefire at least as a first step to be implemented on the whole territory. And then to see the discussions about accountability and what Russia should be doing to stop invading territories. We would like to see that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station is returned to safety and that there is no major issue on nuclear safety in the heart of Europe. I think for all Ukrainians, this is a very sensitive topic because in 1986, we had the Chernobyl nuclear accident. Now, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station is occupied. It's the largest nuclear power station in Europe. And of course, it brings a lot of risks and insecurity and danger for everyone in Europe and on our planet.
Should President Zelensky have a seat at the Alaska summit?
It really depends on how you see this meeting between President Putin and President Trump. There is no question that Ukraine should be deciding and is deciding and will be deciding its own future. As we know, when in 2022 the war started, there was very few hopes among any leaders around the world that Ukraine will withstand. There's Ukrainian people who decided, no, we're not going to give up, without much support from around the world in those first few weeks. So I think even President Zelensky is elected in a free and independent election process. He still depends on the will of Ukrainian people. So what President Trump will decide with Putin might not even be about ceasefire in Ukraine. They can talk about other issues. We know the delegation includes foreign direct investment representative from Russia, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Russian President. So we do not know what this negotiation between Trump and Putin will be and how it will affect Ukraine. If those negotiations do affect Ukraine, then of course Ukraine has to be at that table. We hope that European leaders also will be at that table because Ukraine is part of Europe and this is our common future, our common security issues.
The EU and UK laid out firm principles for peace ahead of the summit. So did this message resonate with Ukrainians both at home, abroad, and people like you in South Africa?
Yes, absolutely. I think Ukrainians are very grateful and very happy to hear those strong messages from European leaders because it is obvious for us that Russia is not a threat only to Ukraine. Putin's ambitions go far beyond Ukraine, like they did far beyond Georgia in 2008 when Putin has invaded Georgia. It also was clear in 2014 that Putin's ambition is not just Crimea and part of the east of Ukraine, that he wants to take over the whole Ukraine. In 2022, it's clear that it's not just the whole Ukraine. He wants to also have part of Europe, control Europe, Europe to be dependent on Russia. So it is very good to hear those strong messages from European leaders. And I think here we come to the most important and most difficult topic of territorial integrity. Because what has happened in 2022, Putin has declared 4 Ukrainian regions as part of Russian territory and voted it into its constitution. So while Russia cannot militarily, after 4 years of full-scale invasion, take over those 4 regions, none of them are fully occupied by Russia, they already are written as part of Russian constitution. So now Putin, even Russia is autocracy and fully dependent on one-person decision for politically to have the vote to exclude those 4 regions from Russian constitution probably would be a political death and maybe physical death for Putin after so many lives being thrown for those to control those areas. So we understand this is not going to happen. Russia is not going to stop the war because now this is part of their constitutional territory, and they could not in 4 years occupy it. So now Putin needs help from Trump. How Ukrainians would voluntarily move out of their homes, out of their territory, so that Putin can control them. But we understand this is not going to happen. Ukraine has its own territory in its constitution, which also cannot be modified. So while this war has nothing to do with the territories, because Putin does not care about the territories, Russia has a very, very large territories, and the core of this war is imperial war, to have a control over people, over people's mind, over against Ukrainian identity, and not so much about the territories. But currently negotiations are about these territories.
How do you think negotiations with Putin should be approached, given his track record? Is there any room for trust?
No, we don't think that Putin can be trusted, but I don't think that this is also necessarily a very important preconditions. Agreements are made not because parties are trusting each other, but because they are forced to do what they have to do. In that sense, I do think that, as we can see, Russian economy is not stable. The 2025 state budget assumes 40% will be spent on Russian war against Ukraine. So Russia will spend almost half of its budget on the war. At the same time, the revenues, 50% of Russian state budget used to come from oil and gas sales, predominantly to Europe. So it does affect significantly that at the moment, European Union is not purchasing gas from Russia and Europe, and the revenue for Russian state budget has already dropped to 30%. Further sanctions, further restrictions on Russian opportunity to sell gas, oil, as well as sanctions on its nuclear company, state company, Rosatom, which provides 8 to 10% of revenue to Russian state budget, would also create a situation when Russia cannot afford the war. And I think this is the only solution how this war can be stopped. Meeting and talking to Putin, the 11 years of war suggest us that this is not a solution. So it's only strong economic sanctions that will put pressure on Russia to make the decisions to stop the war.
So, what does the Ukrainian diaspora, especially those in the EU and your community in South Africa, expect from these talks? Are people hopeful, skeptical, or simply exhausted?
For us, obviously, this war started 11 years ago in 2014, so it did not started now. It's not 3 or 4 years ago. So I think Ukrainian community had a very strong response already then in 2014. And I think the strengths for that response come from Ukrainian history. In 2015, Ukrainian state made a very strong decision to open all the KGB archives. So any family has now access to the stories of what was happening, what is happening, what was happening to Ukrainian people during the Soviet occupation. And even before that. So especially stories such as Holodomor, when in 1932, 1933, um, between 3 to 9 millions of people, if you create the Ukrainian territory, were starved to death by Stalin to prevent from having their own state, from appraisals, from um, opposing to the Soviet realities. I think every Ukrainian family understands what does the Russian occupation mean. So when there's discussions about the territory occupation, about where they're going to be a ceasefire, which territories will be taken by Russia and which are not, I think what we think about those families, about those people who for different reasons could not leave, because now they're under a lot of pressure. They cannot have freedom of religion. And we are not only talking about Christianity, whether they are Crimean Muslim people, they also don't have freedom of religion because Crimean Tatar are recognized as terrorists, total on the territory of Russia, so they are politically persecuted. Ukrainian Orthodox Church is persecuted. Ukrainian Jewish community are also persecuted. Protestant community are tortured and killed. So this is something that, disregarding what kind of religion you are following, you will be persecuted. If you are a member of LGBTQ plus community, you also don't have a future, because at the territory of Russia, this is an offense. So you cannot talk about your identity, you cannot talk about your gender preferences, which means that your life is very limited. You also cannot say that you are supporting Ukraine, and you cannot say that you are willing to learn Ukrainian language. There are millions of Ukrainians living at the territory of Russia. However, there is not a single Ukrainian school at the territory of the whole Russia. So children are not allowed to study even online, because this is seen as something unreliable. So if there is an information that the child is studying Ukrainian online, most likely that child will be separated from parents and will be sent to a special camp where it will have to be re-educated into being a proper Russian. So I think for Ukrainians around the world, we understand that this war is not for territories. This war is against identity, because we understand it's from the history that is now open to us. So I think it's important to understand where we're coming from. It's important to continue finding that face in face that one day this war will end, simply because even during the Holodomor, so many millions of Ukrainians died, but Ukraine still became independent in 1991. So if we look at 300 years of prohibition of Ukrainian identity, and Ukraine still managed to have its state, there is that confidence, internal confidence, that Ukrainian state will survive and will continue flourishing.
Dzvinka, if peace is finally achieved, do Ukrainians want to return home?
Of course, I have no doubts that all Ukrainians are dreaming of living in their own country, where they can work, where they can be themselves, where they're not scared of landmines, because of course Ukraine is now number one in Europe, number one in the world on landmines. And the safety risks are extremely high at the moment. But that feeling of living in your own country, hearing your own language, building your own state, I think it's a privilege that many Ukrainians would want to enjoy when the war ends.
Can you tell us a bit more about the center you work for and the Ukrainian Association in South Africa?
So, as Ukrainian Association of South Africa, we were registered in 2017 with a goal to build relationship between Ukraine and South Africa. We also, so one of our goals is to communicate about the risks that Russia already at that time possess to a Ukrainian state and to the world. We are focusing on the advocacy that is linked to our common interest between Ukraine and South Africa. So those who are interested, please follow Ukrainian Association of South Africa webpage for 3 policy documents. One is on UN reform, because we believe that the situation in Ukraine and what African states have been lobbying for a very long time, that our governance, international governance system is not ideal and has to be adjusted. Currently, we are strong partners. African countries, Ukraine, we all understand that the international system is important, but has to be adjusted. The second is about nuclear safety. Currently, there is only one nuclear power station on the African continent. It's in South Africa. The other one is in a process of construction in Egypt. However, the situation with Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, where not only physically nuclear power station is compromised with mines and military equipment, but also people are tortured there, people disappear, the labor rights are violated. So it's very important that those issues are taken very seriously, because nuclear technology is very important, but it's also a high-risk technology. If we ignore those safety risks, then we all cannot feel safe. And the third topic is about children's deportation. Here we look at the experience of the African continent. Unfortunately, there were a lot of cases where children were separated from their families, and the expertise on reintegration or identification of children that were forcefully separated from their families is also critical for Ukraine to find the children that were forcefully deported to Russia. Currently, there are almost 20,000 of those cases documented, but of course, there are many more undocumented. So we are very happy that the South African President Ramaphosa has openly spoken on the matter of Ukrainian forcefully deported children to Putin in 2023 during Africa Peace Mission. And the topic of Ukrainian forcefully deported children also came during Ramaphosa's conversation with Trump. So we know that South Africa can help to return at least some of Ukrainian children that were deported in Russia, and that's what we would like to see happening.
You've talked about Ukraine's outreach to Africa. You've also started opening up new embassies.
Yes, so since 2022, Ukraine has significantly boosted its collaboration with the continent. Firstly, in 2022, the Ukraine-Africa strategy was developed, which was not present before. Many state institutions, as well as civil society organizations, have started working with African countries. Between 2023 and 2024, 9 new embassies were opened. And if you're talking about the African continent, there are 54 countries. Previously, Ukraine had 10 diplomatic missions that would cover those 54. So now it's almost doubled its presence on the continent. So we can see how important and how much effort Ukraine is putting into this work. So there is already results from that. We can see that 3 academic programs at the university levels on African studies are opened in Ukraine. And similar programs on Ukraine studies would be opening on the continent. So I think it's very important that we understand each other, that communication between 2 different countries continue.
Dzvinka Kachur, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Lindy.